Hello nerds, and welcome back to Lore of the Worlds. Before I begin this review, I want to acknowledge that this is the most biased that I am ever gonna be, and for a very legitimate reason, in my opinion. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, the most romance-heavy Cosmere novel, came out on July 1st, 2023, shortly after I was married, and smack dab in the middle of my honeymoon. I will always have a special fondness for this novel, and luckily for me, my wife decided to read this one as well. In fact, it's actually the only Cosmere book she's ever read. I managed to trick her into it because she loves romantasy, and in exchange, I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, which, frankly, I'm not really sure what to think about that, but that's a topic for another video. So, together, we decided it would be very fun to co-write this video. This is not my review of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. The vessel you see on screen currently is the mere conduit for our collective thoughts on this lovely novel. Before we begin, we do want to warn you there are definitely spoilers ahead. Without further ado, let's jump right in and talk about Yumi, the Nightmare Painter, and what we think of them together. I'll see you after the title. Cat has hopped up here. I don't know if she's gonna stay or not, but we're happy to have her as long as she wants to. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is, in essence, a romantasy novel, and one that follows the tropes of the genre pretty closely. Which of course means that we have two people brought together by magical circumstances that end up happily in love at the end of our story. In this case, the two lovers are the eponymous Yumi and Painter, both on separate but somewhat linked paths that end up colliding with one another. We loved Yumi right from the jump, and her journey to finding peace and self-fulfillment in her literal God-given profession was very fun to read. She starts out as an individual that is utterly dedicated to her craft at the expense of her own self-interest, and it was satisfying watching her realize that she, deserves to have a life outside of work, or just watch TV every now and again. Yumi really resonated with my wife in particular. On the other hand, Painter really resonated with me. Painter is an artist that's lost his passion to create after being beaten down and rejected by the world, and subsequently making a series of incredibly dumb decisions. I could instantly see where he was coming from and why he lied to his friends. It kind of reminds me of something I would have done in his situation when I was at a much younger and much stupider age. So watching him rekindle both his artistic passions and his friendships was absolutely lovely, and we enjoyed both his character and overall character growth. Because yeah, he grew as a character and as a person significantly throughout the course of this book. And really, the characters were one of the strongest parts of this book. Indeed, the characters themselves held up better individually than they did as a romantic couple. We really would have appreciated more time with them in a more romantic setting. One of the biggest complaints that we both have about the book is that they kinda hate each other right up until they don't. We really wish Sanderson would have spent a little bit more time on the in-between parts, especially if he's going for the classic romance trope of enemies to lovers. I guess that's not entirely accurate though. It's more of a people that really annoy one another to lovers story. We would have preferred more time where they were less annoyed at one another. On a more metatextual level, many of the romantic tropes used throughout the story were used in a rather blunt way, which is somewhat understandable considering this is Sanderson's first real romance-heavy novel, but it also really hurt some of the more interesting character work going on. And yet, the real saving grace of the romantic elements of this book was the individuals, not their collective romance. But leaving the romance behind for just a little while, what did we think about the supporting characters in the story? Were they interesting? Well, in one word, absolutely. We both loved design in this story. They served as a nice bit of comedic relief while also explaining some of the more arcane bits of lore throughout the novel. And the decision to have them working in a noodle shop, turning ramen into this art form, it was in and of itself just just lovely. Hoyd was also a good bit of fun, and his narration was slightly more reserved and less over the top than in Tress. Really, this was a general improvement in Sanderson's ability to use Hoyd to tell stories. And I'm gonna quote my wife directly here. He was so good at coat racking, he could not have coat racked better. Personally, I agree. Did I say that right, babe? Okay. The whole rest of Painter's group of friends were a delight, and we wish that there had been just a little bit more interaction with that group of friends. The standout hit from my wife was a Kane, who she called, and this is another direct quote here, a bad bitch and an inspiration to women everywhere. Personally, I agree with that one as well. We didn't really have too much interaction with any characters in Yumi's world other than Liyun, who played the role of evil mentor to a T. They're the exact kind of character that you love to hate, and we found it really interesting that they were the initial nightmare that Painter had interacted with. And yeah, they were a real lowercase n nightmare overall, in a good character way. So what are we to make of this overall? Well, we think the characters of this book were great, and the romantic elements oftentimes got in the way of some of the better character interactions, which we'll expand on a little bit further in the next section. Overall, the character work in this book, we'd score an 8 out of 10. In many ways, this novel is a 50-50 mashup of the typical Sanderson plot with that of a typical romance structure, which works both to its benefit and detriment. Painter's arc follows the basic outline of the hero's journey that Sanderson has been iterating on and perfecting for the last 15-odd years. There's even a little nod to this in the beginning. Yumi literally starts off by calling him hero. Of course, this heroic status is quickly deconstructed and has to be built back up, both with Yumi and with his friends. She's pretty much already there. She's already a hero, just one that is deeply unfulfilled in her station. This frees her character up to focus on the journey of self-actualization, and indeed, many of the chapters in which her character is being developed focus primarily on this. Putting those two distinct character paths together was a really fun choice, and as we've stated, it works for them as individual characters. In essence, it's two classic Sanderson arcs mashed together and slotted into the structure of a romance novel. So, how does it all work in the context of a romance novel? Well, it works okay. Every single plot point was hit right about exactly when it needed to be hit, and it's clear Sanderson did some research on how to structure a romance like this, or who knows, maybe he's already had a bit of experience writing AO3 One Direction fanfics on the side. Who knows? Can you imagine? Seriously though, right when we were starting to wonder, like, hey, when is this plot point going to happen? It happened, like, right on the dot, which worked great for a reader's first romance novel, as I kind of suspect it was for many people reading that, myself included. But the more romance we read, the more we want to see things switched up a bit, the structure of things played around with, the context of plot points tweaked to create new meaning from old tropes, etc., etc., etc. But none of that is to say that it wasn't really effective. It really was, especially for Sanderson's primary audience. As for the budding romance between Yumi and Painter, one specific thing we were lacking was a distinct point where their individual character paths start to, meet in the middle, where we can really see that they can be together. We don't really see that distinct attitude shift until the Kirihito Carnival, and by that point we're practically in the climax already. Unfortunately, there's also an elephant in the room that we're gonna need to talk about with this story. The age gap. No, I'm just kidding. They're like mentally the same age, so the several thousand-year-old age gap doesn't really matter in this context. The real elephant in the room is that, well, this is a Sanderson book, so there's no building tension of, are they going to have sex? They're not, and we know that. Also, they magically can't, but you get what I'm saying, I think. In the classic enemies to lovers trope, there's always the underlying thread of building sexual tension as the characters resist their urges to, Again, they're not really even super friendly to each other until the Kilahito Carnival. None of this is to say that a sexless romance novel can't be done well, they absolutely can. But sexual tension and sex as a plot point is used often for a reason. It's an incredibly effective draw to get two characters to start seeing on the same page, to say, well, if we could put aside our differences for like 2 seconds to do what we just did as well as we just did it, what else could we accomplish together? Overall, we kind of get the impression we might have been a little too focused on the negatives in this section, but we really hope it doesn't come across as us not having liked the romance aspects. We really did enjoy the romance aspects of this novel, but one of us, not saying which one, has read like a ton of romance novels and had quite a bit to say about those elements of the book. So, in essence, this was a very lovely, if at times very on the nose, take on a Sanderson novel fit, oftentimes awkwardly, inside of the structure of a romance novel. 8 out of 10 for plotting and structure. Sanderson is nothing if not incredibly effective at building interesting worlds and making them feel lived in, no matter how small or insignificant to the overall story of the Cosmere they may be. And luckily for us, this book is no different. The explorations of not one, but 2 different cultures on the planet of Komashi was very well done. And as always in Sanderson books, there's some fun little quirks and flares that are explored in each culture that revolve around the circumstances in which the culture finds itself. Some of our favorite examples of those little cultural flares that pop up were the Heian soap operas, the religious rituals of the Yokihijo, and the unique and interesting takes on clothing for each individual culture. I personally loved the explorations of how these cultures rely on their various magics to function, and how those magics have shaped their respective cultures. One interesting motif that I'm starting to see pop up more and more in Sanderson's work is that of technological progress being spurred along by intense hardships experienced by a culture. So that is to say, wars, ecological disasters, and human-caused disasters will force a civilization to develop quicker, leaving them farther along a technological path than they would have been if everything went smoothly, if everything went according to plan. Humans in the Cosmere are rugged. They adapt and they overcome when they need to, and there is always that will to survive. We found the mystery of how these 2 separate settings were connected to be really compelling and really fun. We also loved the visceral imagery provided in the book. Everything was just immediately picturable in the mind's eye, and it really added to the immersion overall. The actual pictures in the book may have helped with this too, but I actually didn't get to see a good chunk of the pictures until far after I had read the book. Remember, I was on my honeymoon when this came out, and I'm the type of person who doesn't really need to be reading a physical copy. Being able to read the ebook was absolutely delightful for the train rides and flights we had to be taking, and the amount of fun lore contained within this tome right here. It made sure I devoured it incredibly quickly. Before we move on to our last and most important topic of analysis, let's go ahead and talk about time travel. Now, one of us is a huge fan of time travel romance stories and was very disappointed when they found out that there was not actual time travel involved here. The other of us is a gigantic Cosmere nerd and knows via words of Brandon that time travel isn't really possible in the Cosmere, just like some time dilation weirdness. The one of us that knows the Cosmere was convinced that they were on separate planets, and the one that doesn't know the Cosmere correctly saw the star in the sky as a sort of red herring from the very beginning. She was also convinced, one of us was also convinced that the shining planet in the sky was a setup for another story, and it would appear that okay, fine, yes, she's the time travel one, I'm the Cosmere nerd. It would appear that she was 100% correct, like usual. We loved the lore and overall world building of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. 9 out of 10 for lore and world building. Setting a good portion of scenes in a noodle shop was a profoundly smart choice for Sanderson to make. Like, sure, you could argue that this was a natural gathering place for the setting, or that it gives an excuse to use Hoyd as the best coat rack to have ever coat racked, but I appreciate this choice because I really, really, really love ramen. So you bet your ass I was engaged during those scenes. Like, seriously, okay, lore of the world, not only used to work in a ramen shop in college, but I go out of my way to visit ramen shops in like every city that I can, including while we were in Iceland on our honeymoon, like right after finishing the book. And it was legitimately like some of the best noodles I've ever had in my entire life. Ramen Momo in Reykjavik deserves 4 Michelin stars, and we will both fight you if you disagree. Oh my god, I'm so off topic. In summary, Design's Noodle Shop gets 10 bowls of noodles out of 10. I know that I started this video off by stating that this is probably the most biased I'm ever gonna get, and I do stand by that, but it really was an absolute delight to experience. To recap, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is going to get 8 out of 10 for characters, an 8 out of 10 for plotting and structure, a 9 out of 10 for lore and world building, and 10 bowls of noodles out of 10 for, like, bowls of noodles. We both really hope that Sanderson decides to delve a bit deeper into the romance aspects of his stories in the future, if for no other reason than it gives me an excuse to trick my wife into reading another Sanderson book. We also both really hope that people stop recommending Sanderson on the romance book subreddit, because seriously, Mistborn Era 1 does not belong there, no matter how you personally feel about Vin and Elend. This has been such a fun video to make, and my wife and I really do thank you from the bottom of our hearts for watching. I'm Lore of the Worlds, and this video was co-written by Lore of the Wife. Look at this gorgeous kitty. Hi folks, this video was an absolute blast to make. Please go ahead and subscribe to my Patreon so that I can go to Iceland to get another bowl of noodles.